One of the beauties of narration is that we can customize the length of a reading before we ask for the narration. For some students, it might be easy to listen to a whole chapter before narrating. For others, it might be a challenge to listen to just one paragraph. But Charlotte Mason recognized that wide spectrum and encouraged us to break apart longer readings into shorter segments as needed. We definitely want to start shorter when a student is new to narration, but how quickly that student progresses to longer passages can vary widely depending on the individual, and that's okay. The object is not to plow through the material and check it off as completed. The object is to give your student living ideas at her pace and let her assimilate what she is ready for. So, let's talk about how to break apart a longer reading into shorter segments that make sense. Here are some principles and practical tips for you. Welcome to the Simply Charlotte Mason podcast. I'm Sonia Schaefer. All right, here's one principle to start with. When you are dividing a longer passage into shorter segments, don't stop just anywhere. The points at which you pause your reading can affect how well your student will mentally be able to piece it together when you get to the end of the passage. You want to include a complete thought or idea in each segment. So, if you're reading the story of creation from Genesis 1, for example, a logical place to pause would be at the end of the description for each day of creation. If your student can take in more than one day's description at a time, you could read 2 days' descriptions before you pause. What you don't want to do is read 1.5, stopping abruptly partway through day 2's description. And the same concept goes for passages that contain conversations. You don't want to stop in the middle of a conversation usually. Now, perhaps you're reading The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and you come to Chapter 3, How Dorothy Saved the Scarecrow. There's a lot of dialogue in that chapter, and you'll want to be careful that you don't stop in the middle of a conversation. Here's how one of those exchanges begins. "Good day," said the Scarecrow in a rather husky voice. "Did you speak?" asked the girl in wonder. "Certainly," answered the Scarecrow. "How do you do?" Now, that might seem to be a good stopping point. But if you look at the next line, you'll discover that it makes for a difficult re-entry if you pause there. The next line is, "I'm pretty well, thank you," replied Dorothy politely. "How do you do?" Dorothy's replying, and it's awkward to begin a reading with a reply. If we would just keep reading for 3 more lines, we'll reach the end of this conversation. "Oh, I'm not feeling well," said the Scarecrow with a smile, "for it's very tedious being perched up here night and day to scare away crows." "Can't you get down?" asked Dorothy. "No, for this pole is stuck up my back. If you will please take away the pole, I shall be greatly obliged to you." Now we have a good pause point. The dialogue pauses naturally in the book. The next line tells the action that Dorothy took. So we can pause here too and have the student narrate what has transpired in the conversation. Then we can pick up with the action and go on from there. Now, of course, some books have long conversations with pages and pages of dialogue, but you can usually still find logical places to pause in the conversation. There's no hard and fast rule that you must read a certain number of lines before pausing. Just look for natural pause points in descriptions and in conversations. And that same principle holds true for passages that narrate several events in a person's life. Try to pause between episodes. So, for example, if you're reading about Joseph in the Bible, you could pause at the end of each chapter, but there are usually shorter episodes contained within each chapter. Genesis chapter 37 contains these episodes. Jacob gives Joseph a coat of many colors, and his brothers are jealous. That's 1. The next episode, Joseph dreams about his family bowing down to him and tells them about those dreams. Episode 3, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers in the fields, and a man helps Joseph to find them. Episode 4, the brothers conspire to get rid of Joseph. And episode 5, the brothers sell Joseph as a slave and lie to their father about it. That's 5 different episodes within one chapter. And just as with the description passage, you can pause after each of those episodes, or you can combine 2 of the episodes or even 3, just depending on how long of a section your student is ready for. Let me give you 2 tips for finding those episode breaks. First, look for keywords that signal a time change or a change of topic. Usually, those keywords are going to occur at the beginning of a paragraph. So you might see the next morning at the beginning of a paragraph. Okay, that might be a good place to pause the reading and pick it up right there for the next section, depending on how it fits into the rest of the passage. Or you might see, when so-and-so woke up, or later in the day. Those time change words can often signal good places to pause. If the passage is descriptive, you might see keywords such as, another thing to consider is, or perhaps the author's points might even be labeled as first, second, third, and so on. Keywords like that can help you find logical pause points. Now, the second tip to find those logical stopping points is to reverse outline the passage. You may have done some outlining in high school when you were assigned to write a longer research paper or an essay. In that case, you created an outline that showed the points that you wanted to include and the order in which you wanted to include them. Reverse outlining is similar, but you're taking the finished paper or essay, or in this case the chapter, and you're creating the outline based on what the author already wrote. You're trying to visualize the structure of the piece. Here's a simple example. Think of the story of the 3 pigs, the 3 little pigs. First, the pigs are sent out to make their own ways in the world. Second, they each build their house out of their chosen material, one out of straw, one out of sticks, and one out of bricks. Third, we see how each of their houses stands up to the big bad wolf. All right, there you go. That's one way to outline the story. You could also get more detailed, and under the part where they each build their house, you could itemize some subpoints for each pig and what it shows. One subpoint for the pig who built his house out of straw, and one for the pig who built his house of sticks, and one for the pig with the house out of bricks. And you could do those same subpoints with how their houses stood up to the wolf, taking each pig in turn. Once you've visualized the structure of the passage, you can see logical places to stop the readings. You might read the text for an entire outline point, or you could read just the text for one of the subpoints, depending on where your student is in the process. Reverse outlining gives you a framework to determine good places to pause in a passage. Now, here's another principle to keep in mind. Even when you're breaking apart a reading into smaller sections, you want to be aware of the time you are spending on the entire lesson. Be careful not to exceed the maximum time allotted for the reading and the narration together. For 1st through 3rd grade, that maximum is 20 minutes. No lesson should be longer than 20 minutes. You can do a shorter lesson, but don't do a longer one. And keep in mind that the 20 minutes limit includes both reading and narrating. So if you're breaking apart a reading, read the first section and have your student narrate, and then look at the clock and see if you have time to do another section, both the reading and the narrating, without going past your maximum time. If you have time, go ahead. But if you don't, then just stop there and pick up at that point the next day that the book is scheduled. Now, that maximum time can be bumped out to 30 minutes for 4th through 6th graders and 45 minutes for 7th grade and up. But remember, those are maximum times. Keep the lessons shorter if that's what your student needs in order to give full attention for the entire lesson. So how do you know how long this next section might take? Well, you can get an idea of how long it will take you to cover a passage if you do a little timed experiment beforehand. Grab a stopwatch or use the stopwatch on your phone and open one of your students' books to any page. Start the stopwatch and begin reading aloud at your usual pace. When you have read 5 lines, stop the stopwatch and note how long it took you to read those lines. Now, multiply that time to get to 60 seconds, and you'll have an approximate guideline for how many lines of a passage you can read in a minute. For example, if it took you about 20 seconds to read those 5 lines aloud, that means you'll be able to read 15 lines in a minute. Here's how the math breaks down. 20 seconds times 3 will get you your 60 seconds, or a minute. So, multiply the 5 lines times the same number, 3. 5 lines times 3 means 15 lines per minute. Now you have a loose estimator. If the section that you plan to read is about 30 lines long, then you can estimate it's going to probably take about 2 minutes for me to read it out loud. Now here's a little tip that I've picked up over the years. Allow about the same amount of time to narrate as to read. So if you're estimating that this next section will probably take 2 minutes to read, allow another 2 minutes for the narration. If the next section will take 3 minutes to read, allow another 3 minutes for that narration. Using that little estimating tool, you can get an idea of how many sections you might expect to include in that one lesson. Okay, and here's another little tip. Once you've determined where your section breaks make the most sense, then make little pencil marks or put little self-stick flags in your book at those spots. That way you can focus on reading aloud and just see at a glance where you're going to pause when you come to one of those markers. Now, as with any skill, the more you practice breaking apart a longer reading, the easier it's going to become. But often our tendency is to just pick up the book and try to feel our way through and find good stopping points as we go along. It's not impossible to do, but believe me, it's making things more difficult for yourself than they need to be. It is worth it to take 5 minutes or so to look through a passage ahead of time and determine where it makes sense to break it apart into sections. Those few minutes of preparation will help you feel more confident and at peace as you present the lesson, and it will give your student the advantage of a well-planned, well-thought-through reading. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.